friends, and welcome back to the Rewind podcast of Forward Church. Join us each week as we take a look back on Sunday's message and dig a little deeper into the conversations with those who are teaching across our sites at Forward. We want to invite you to be part of the conversation too. So if something we're talking about on Sunday morning sparks a question in you, head to our website, forwardchurch.ca/ask us, and submit your questions there. And we're going to do our best to engage with those questions in this space. With that said, let's jump in and get started.
Well, howdy, everyone.
Oh, we have a good echo.
Oh,
there we
echo.
go. There we go. Now we get.
There we go. Hey, howdy, everyone. We're jumping into the podcast. No technical issues here.
We're good.
Yeah, we're all good. Excellent. Thanks for tuning in today. I think we're going to have a great conversation. I got myself and Pastor Kirk here today.
Daryl, how are you, man?
Doing all right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah? Did you have a good weekend?
It was a good weekend. We went to a trick or trunk event on the weekend for Natalie's dance studio.
Okay.
And it was fun. It was a good time. How about yourself?
I had a great weekend. Yeah, I got to went golfing with my sons on Saturday afternoon. Kind of one final golf outing before winter hits.
Golfing in October.
Yeah,
boy.
It was great.
Wow.
It was beautiful weekend. And then spent some time hanging out with some of our other kids, and then Sunday night got to hang out with our granddaughter, and life is better with a baby. Everything's better with a baby, especially when the baby can just be given back to the parents afterwards.
Yeah. That's a blessing at the end of the day.
It is a blessing at the end of the day. No, it was a great weekend, and really, had a great time of rest, but also a wonderful time worshiping with the church on Sunday morning, and just hearing some stories of God at work. It's been a good weekend.
All right. Well, speaking of weekends, all right, Kirk, I want you to imagine. All right. Just take a moment now. Imagine it's the early 2000s.
Way back in the day.
It's getting pretty far way back then. Right. Early 2000s. It's the weekend, or maybe the beginning of the weekend. It's a Friday, and you're looking for something to do on a Friday night. Yeah. You want to watch a movie.
Yeah. Where
do you go?
On a Friday night when I go, I just go to a theater or Blockbuster Video.
Blockbuster. There you go. That's
go to Blockbuster. That's the right answer.
Go to Blockbuster.
Go to Blockbuster. Get a movie.
That's the answer.
Rent a movie.
Nowadays, no more Blockbuster.
No more Blockbuster. But
doesn't exist.
Is the last Blockbuster store officially closed? There was one.
Yes, in Bend, Oregon.
Yeah,
I've been to Bend.
I'm sure. I'm confident you have. I'm sure you're not telling stories right now.
We didn't go to. I didn't know about it, but we were in Bend. It's actually a great vacation spot. So did a family vacation there one time, and I didn't even realize that's where the last Blockbuster still is. Last I heard, they're still holding on.
Yeah,
though it wasn't looking great.
Yep.
They were not doing great.
No, they were not. They were not at all.
But back in the early 2000s. There were thousands of locations across North America, and somehow along the way they lost their path, and all their stores shut down. They filed for bankruptcy in 2010. So that's how I started my message on Sunday.
That's how you started your message?
That's how I started it, and we'll get to where this is all going. But the question for you is there something from back in the day where it no longer exists, but you would have to think to yourself, you kind of miss it? Because part of me kind of misses the Blockbuster. I kind of miss wandering the aisles, just kind of trying to figure out what to watch. Netflix, these streaming services, they claim to have every movie, but they really don't. I think that Blockbuster had greater variety, especially the bigger stores. So I kind of miss it. It was kind of fun, and now it's gone, and a little while ago, I actually Googled because I watched a documentary on it. I'm like, are there rental stores around? And no, they're just gone. They don't exist. The mom and pop shops, yeah, they're long gone as well. But is there something that you kind of look back? I kind of wish this thing exists, or at least in its older form.
Yeah, that's a great question, because when I think back to I was just talking to someone the other day about different department stores that don't exist anymore, and I can honestly say I don't miss them. So I don't miss them at all. Here's one in the world of wishing for simpler times. Is I wish that dial up phones, like phones that actually plug into your wall, was the norm, as opposed to the thing that I have in my pocket at all times.
Okay. Why is that?
It's the simplicity of not always being accessible.
Okay.
There's just something about when you are accessible 24/7. There is something about there's parts of that are good to be accessible that easily, and there are other parts of it that I'm like, I really wish I could just like disappear into a quiet space right now and not be accessible. And so there's just something about, my phone's at home, and if you're trying to reach me, you got to reach me at home, and if I'm not there, oh well, like leave a message, I'll get back to you eventually.
The fascinating thing, if you watch a movie that's only like 20 years old or so, you'll notice like there's certain plot points that cannot happen nowadays. Like there's the whole
payphone booths.
The whole situation is all contingent upon they can't get a hold of the person.
Where does Superman get changed now?
Yeah.
Like there's no more payphone booths.
Yeah. No.
Superman has nowhere to actually get out of his suit and into.
Well, they solve that problem by nowadays everyone just knows his secret identity.
That's right.
They just solved that by just saying it just isn't secret anymore.
That's right. It just ruins the whole thing.
What was actually a great plot point, it was really overlooked in like the newer Superman movies, is that Lois Lane does know his secret identity.
Yeah.
They never really talk about it. But the writer said, as he was writing it, he's like, yeah, we just took that out because, she's supposed to be the greatest reporter of all time. She knows. Okay. Right. Like they never talk about it, but she knows who he is.
It's true.
Just as an unsaid thing. The thing I kind of miss, although not really, the thing I do kind of miss is back in the day, you had to be at home at 8:00 if you wanted to watch a certain show, a certain program.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you can watch it anytime you want to, but there used to be this thing of like
appointment viewing.
It was in a moment, and if you miss that moment, it's gone, maybe forever. You might just never see that thing, and everyone just was okay with it.
The only thing that's like that now is sports. Like live sports is, and that's part of the reason why networks pay so much money for live sports, because it is the only thing remaining that is appointment viewing. When you're in the playoffs or in the championships, and like nobody wants to watch the game after the game's done, because I can look online and see what the score is and ruin it for myself.
Sure.
Or my friend is texting me saying, "Did you see that?" I'm like, "No, I didn't see that. I was playing with my kid."
Yeah, but you see, like I'm not a real baseball fan, so I love that, because now I can watch Jays in 30.
It's true.
And so I can just like, they always hit the ball, or always something happens in every moment of them watching them, because I'm not a real fan.
And in some ways, Jays in 30 is good stewardship, because you're not spending a crazy amount of time.
Sometimes I'll just scrub across and be like, okay, how does this end?
Yep.
How did they blow it this time?
Yep.
They were up by 6 and just nope. Gone. Yeah. Anyways, there you go. But like I said, I'm not a real fan. So we're talking about things that we do miss, but and we'll get back to that, because that all talks about how things change over time, and sometimes things change for the better, and sometimes they change for the worse. And looking back on these things in the past, like I don't want to say rose-colored glasses now, everything's just better now, but certainly things have changed, and companies have come and have gone, and we'll get to that. But right now, I just want to talk specifically about our brand new series, Mission Forward. Launched it this week. And so, Kirk, I want us to dive into why are we doing this series right now? And my follow-up question to it is, do you ever get tired of preaching these mission-focused Sundays? I mean, it's not the first time, and it won't be the last time we cover this topic. And so let's just talk about that for a moment. Like, why are we doing this? And if anyone's been around for more than a year, this will be a repeat message in many ways.
Yep.
So are we just out of material? Is that the question? Is that the answer to the question?
That's exactly what's going on. Yep. Yeah, we got really busy for a few weeks there, and we were just like, what else could we preach on? Oh, I know. Let's go back and do this.
Yeah, just dust it off.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
No, here's the reality. You, as Christians, as people, we all need things to kind of bring ourselves back into focus. It's so easy that our lives, we just get so busy with so many things that are coming at us and pressures from different angles. And as Christians, we need moments where we just kind of step back from all the craziness and the busyness, and we go, like, let's clarify, let's regain perspective on what's most important. Mm-hmm. Let's recalibrate our lives, so to speak. And I think that as a church, we need to do the same thing, both individually and collectively as a church, that we need to have moments where we just stop all the other noise that is around us, pull ourselves back and say, like, what are we really about? What's the point of all of this? And is there anywhere where we're off the mark right now, where we are going in directions that actually don't line up with who we say we are? And how do we recalibrate ourselves towards that? So I think that this is a really timely thing for people who've been part of the church for years. But I think it's also a really important thing for people who are brand new to the church, who don't maybe have the full DNA of what Forward is all about. And it's a time to bring us collectively together in unity, whether you're new or whether you've been around here your entire life, to say, let's remind ourselves, this is what we are about as a church. And, I said on Sunday in Cambridge, we're not about this just because a bunch of people sat in a room and said, we need to come up with a really, catchy mission statement.
Yeah.
No, it's because Jesus told us this is what we're about. And so we want to be about this, not because it's about Forward, but it's ultimately because what Jesus has called us to.
Yeah, and that's actually a great thing I want to dive into a little bit more, because this is refocusing back onto the mission. And love what you just said there. It makes me think a lot of in a marriage. A couple, they'll go out on a date night, or they'll go away for a night or two around their anniversary to kind of reconnect and just kind of get back to like, hey, like, why are we still married? Like, why are we still in this relationship? And it's kind of this recentering moment where when you have the busyness of life, of taking the kids to all of their different activities and appointments, where somehow that can kind of drift away, and we have those recentering moments. In many ways, the message is kind of recentering us back onto that.
It is. And I don't ever get tired of talking about it. And the reason I don't get tired of talking about it is because for me personally, this is like not even just Kirk the pastor, but Kirk the person.
Yeah.
This is the thing that I am most passionate about in life. I can talk about this forever, because this is, for me, as a disciple of Jesus, this is ultimately what Jesus has called me to. I said to people on Sunday, I don't think there is any more important mission on the planet that you could give your life to than this one, because it is the only mission you can give your life to that has eternal implications.
So let's break this apart a little bit more, because we as a church, as Forward Church, as the organization, we have a mission vision to make disciples who love God, love others, and serve the world. So that is if you're wearing a more cynical hat right now, that is our brand. That is what we do. It's on the wall. That's Forward. And if you go to another church, they might not have that wording.
Yep.
And so help us understand, like, is this mission? Is this a forward specific mission? Or is this the mission of the church? And if you go to a church that doesn't say, love God, love others, serve the world, are they wrong? Like,
Obviously they are. Obviously they are.
I mean,
obviously there's only one church in the world that's right. No.
And then the follow-up question is, have you seen variations on that tagline?
Yeah.
Because there's other churches out there. But I want to dive into that a little bit more because because I've had conversations like that where I'll talk about like, oh man, that's really a forward thing. I'm like, well, it is forward, but it's also the church. But also understand like there's other churches that might express it certain other ways. Yep. And so I don't want to get caught up too much in the nuance of the specific wording, but how should we understand that as as a forward church member or someone who's connected with the church? Is this something we should view as our specific mission or the mission broadly for the church?
Yeah, great question. So I think let's start with this. Let's remember that the Great Commission that we studied on Sunday is something that's given to all of Jesus' disciples for all of time. So the Great Commission itself is the mission of every follower of Jesus, and by default, it becomes the mission of every church that claims to follow Jesus. Whether a church chooses to put that in its language or not is a different story or conversation, but from the perspective of Jesus, this is the mission that he's given to us. Now, churches and individuals will all kind of put their own little twists on the language of how they would define describe this mission. But in essence, any Bible-believing church, if you were to just kind of spend some time looking at what they believe and what they say they're about, you should at some point come to a place where they are talking about we exist to make disciples of Jesus somewhere in the grand scheme of the things that they're saying.
Yeah.
And if they don't, like if that never shows up anywhere of their reason for existing as a church, you should ask some bigger questions in terms of how do they line up with what Jesus is actually saying. Now, in the case of Forward, like we use the language of make disciples of Jesus who love God, love others, serve the world. And we really do that. And we'll unpack that some more over the next few weeks. But we really do that as a way of summarizing the teachings of Jesus. Because Jesus says to us that the greatest commandment, the most important commandment in all the law is love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. And then, of course, we have this in Matthew 28. And so we've got this picture of love God, love others, go and make disciples, serve the world. And so that's just language we chose to adopt to try to summarize the teachings of Jesus. But there's lots of different ways people can choose to describe it and use whatever language they're going to use. But it's more about what's the heart of what you're getting at, and is that in alignment with Jesus?
I'm online a lot, researching what other churches are doing, trying to learn from them, and just seeing what's out there. And so I've seen some variations on it. Some of them I feel are a little bit hilarious at times.
Oh yeah.
Where one was so oddly similar, but not quite. It was like worship God, make friends, and evangelize everyone. And I'm reading it, I'm like, that doesn't roll off the tongue quite the same way, but it's just interesting to me. I'm like, hey, like they get it, and it's not because there's like one big PR program that went out a decade ago to get all these churches. It's just all these churches around the world looking into the Word and seeing like, hey, like this is the essentials of what Jesus taught. Like this is what it means to be a church and to be disciples. And I actually really appreciate it when a church, like if they put in there, instead of love others, they put be friendly.
Yeah.
Or I'm like, okay, I'm looking at a church in like Minnesota, and like to them, like be friendly just makes sense in that context to use that wording.
Yep.
And I'm like, that's awesome. That's a beautiful expression of how they're contextualizing it for where they're at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. And, you see the early church, from the book of Acts on, really adopt this as their way of living, their way of existing as a church. And so, it's not just we read it in the Gospels, Jesus tells us this, but we see, the originators, the people who set the foundation, so to speak, for the body of Christ through all the last 2,000 years. They tried to live this out.
So this is a series I always appreciate whenever we get back to it. If to be really honest, sometimes because I just don't want to repeat myself, a series like this I do find a little challenging at times because I don't want to say the same story that I shared last year.
I find Christmas and Easter more challenging than
I put them all in that category, all important. And we will get to them each year, and it's just that repetition. There's something about I just want to make sure it's fresh, that there's something there, and yet we got to get back to it. We're not going to skip Christmas this year. Don't worry, we're gonna do it this year. It's gonna be the same thing, and it's gonna be great. Everyone will love it.
But I think it's
awesome.
I think it's important. I think just the way that humans are wired, as people, we need things to come back to.
Yeah,
we need things that kind of our anchor points in our lives that bring us back into reality of what's really important in life. And I think that's one of the reasons even Jesus creates and institutes communion for us. It's an act of worship and remembrance of what Jesus has done for us. But it's also Jesus says, as often as you do this, you're proclaiming my death. It's a form of sharing the gospel with each other and reminding each other of what Jesus has done for us. And we need to, even though we all know the story, communion kind of brings us back. It's like our Creator knows we need to have these soft resets in our lives to bring us back to what's important.
All right. At the risk of this derailing all of my notes, I'm going to dive a little bit more into that. Those anchor points. And certainly there are things throughout the year that we look to as anchor points. Christmas, Easter, there are these certain things. There's communion as a practice that we have, and for our church, we do it once a month. Are there other anchor points? And you can either speak to this broadly as the church, or you can speak to it as for yourself. Are there anchor points in your day or your week or in the church's rhythm of life that help keep drifting away from the central things of the gospel?
Yeah, great question. I think for me, the gathering of God's people together on Sunday for worship is another anchor point. It forces me to, even though I live in, one of the things people don't understand about pastors is this is, in terms of our job of being a pastor, it's so easy for us to get caught up in all the details of all the things that need to happen in the life of our church. And, Sunday morning worship just kind of snaps me out of it and brings me back to, oh God, this is what this is really all about. It's as important as it is that all the things that I did during the week happened, that I checked off all my items on my to-do list. Really, what matters most is that Jesus is being honored and lifted high. And, gathering with God's people in a worship service kind of brings me back and snaps me back into that. Had that happen even this past Sunday during the service. I think that other moments, like in the life of our church, Celebration Sunday. I think that a lot of times as Christians or as people, we're not great at looking back at what God has done. We keep okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And Celebration Sunday kind of forces us into a spot of saying, let's take one Sunday a year. Let's just look back and celebrate the faithfulness and goodness of God over the past year. And I think that's a real gift and good rhythm for us as a church to have that. And then even in my own personal life, this isn't necessarily a spiritual practice, but things like birthdays and anniversaries just snap me back out of the busyness of my life and make me go, oh, like, yeah, that's right. Like this, I get to spend this time with this person, and this is what matters most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that there's two practices for myself. One practice I try, and I've been trying to get better at this, is often I'll hear from people saying, you'll miss the stage that your kids are at.
Yep.
You're going to miss it. You're going to blink and it's gone. And, my kids now, they're 5 and 3. And in so many ways, in those early years, it felt like eternity.
Yep.
Like, just grow up already so I can get past the crying stage and the endless diapers and the late nights that, just somehow turn to days.
Yep.
All those things. And it's so true. Now I look back, I'm like, oh, I kind of miss that. And in the busyness of life, my son, he's 5, he wants to play, and sometimes I have stuff I want to do. And I get to the end of my day, I'm like, I want to make sure I don't miss these moments. And so trying in those moments, just saying, okay, I'm going to actually forget about all the other responsibilities, all the other things. I want to just live in this moment right now. And I think in many ways, that's what I want to do when I come on Sundays is I want to live in that moment of prayer and of worship, of being with the church family. Where if you've been a Christian for any length of time, you might have those anchor moments where you went to a conference or like a particular worship service that just felt so good, and then you go back the next week and you're like, it's not quite the same. They didn't play my favorite song or something like that. But I think it's a matter of us forcing ourselves to just live in that moment. Where it might be there's distractions and pressures in life where, hey, to spend that time, that moment of really enjoying this time of being with other believers and lifting our voices in worship. So I think that's one practice I try. But then the other practice is every day spending some time reading. I find incredibly helpful in that, again, I can just get so caught up in all the busyness of life where it just always draws me right back into, okay, here's a central thing I just need to be focusing back on as I'm reading, and particularly on things that I know that are going to feed my soul in a really direct way. Where some stuff I read, it's more, I'm probably wrestling with the author. I'm not sure if I agree with them. That tends not to fill my tank quite as much. But today I was reading a book called The Unhurried Pastor. I was trying to just flip through that as fast as I can.
It's a good book.
It feels very ironic. I'm trying to read through it fast. But again, just feeling like, okay, this is helping me to not, go adrift in what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, if people are listening, there's a kind of a companion book called The Unhurried Life, and it's worth checking out.
So I've mentioned a couple of times this idea of drifting. So I want to dive back into that. So on Sunday, I spent some time unpacking this idea of mission drift. And that's why I talked about Blockbuster, this idea of a company that was doing fantastic, just doing great, killing all the competition out there. And they kind of missed what their mission was. They thought it was about renting movies, but it was about providing affordable entertainment in the home. That was actually the real mission. And streaming services popped up. And by the time Blockbuster jumped onto any form of streaming services, anything like that, they already were hemorrhaging money, and they were done. They shut their doors in 2010. And so for some really young people in the church, they don't even know Blockbuster.
Right.
That's just something that's completely different for them.
I used to go to Blockbuster to rent video games.
Oh yeah.
I actually rented more video games from Blockbuster than I did movies.
I actually didn't go to Blockbuster too much. I would go to the mom and pop shop down the road because it was cheaper. It was cheaper. But anyway, so they had this mission, but they kind of drifted from it, and it killed them. And that's what mission drift is. And it can happen in so many different areas of our life. And I want to connect that to the church because, hey, it's one thing if a movie rental company disappears. We can have some nostalgia, but ultimately, throughout the course of human history, who cares? It's just a company. It's just an organization. Those people who work there, it was too bad for them. They went and got other jobs, right? And life continues on. For the church, how much more important is it for us to make sure that we know our mission, that we live on mission, and that we never drift from it? And I would say that there have been churches over time that have drifted from their mission and thought that they were about other things. And what ended up happening is that there are churches all across North America, and not for this only reason, but for some, the reason why they're shutting their doors today is because they lost their first love.
Yep.
And we even see this in the New Testament. We see in the book of Revelation where like one of the things I've spoken to the churches is saying, hey, woe to you, you forgot your first love and you started focusing on other things that aren't necessarily bad things.
Yep.
And I want to make sure like that's clear is these aren't necessarily bad things, but they're not essential things.
Yep.
And so, Kirk, I want us to think about this now of what are signs that we might be experiencing mission drift? What are things that we need to look out for in our own lives and make sure that we are not actually replacing what is essential with what is non-essential? What are some core things you think we should look out for?
Oh man, Daryl, I could talk for hours on this.
Perfect. Okay.
We don't have hours. So yeah, I mean, there's obvious things where there's mission drift on certain theological issues that have happened, and where people they'll change certain aspects of the gospel. They'll change certain things that seem to be, in at least for 2,000 years of church history, were consistently believed in as being essential things to believe in, and people will say, well, maybe not, and so they'll change some of those things. So those are what I would call more obvious things where you're drifting from mission. But mission drift is called mission drift for a reason, because it's not usually noticeable.
Right.
It's like a casual, very slow thing that happens over time. And one of the I mean, I've worked with churches across Canada for most of my career, whether it was pastoring here or whether it's in kind of a consulting, coaching world, in training leaders. One of the things that has been a really significant flag for me, and I'm not, please do not hear me as saying that churches that fall in this category are all going through mission drift. I am not saying that. So that's my upfront kind of notation. But I get concerned when churches emphasize that the point of church is community. Community is incredibly important. We believe that, we try to live that, we try to encourage that. It is incredibly important. But they use different language. Some will talk about community, some will talk about building great friendships, some will, things like that. But the kind of core essence is just be with your people and enjoy your people. Well, the problem with that thinking is when you create that as the thing that church is about, you immediately put up barriers for people to go, which is what the Great Commission tells us. Like, you got to go. Well, but I like my people. I like my comfort. I like my circle of friends. No, but that's not the point. The point isn't you just having your nice circle of friends. The point is there's a mission to go and make more and better disciples of Jesus.
And that's something that we're experiencing right now when we think of Andrew starting a new site in Paris.
Yeah.
Like the issue there is, I know he's calling people to join him.
Yeah.
And you can probably speak more directly on this of like that's challenging, because what that means for most of those people on that launch team are going to be there day one. They have friends at Forward Cambridge, which is primarily where he's pulling from. And that means either you have to convince all of your other friends in your network to come with you, which Andrew might say, great, so, we need more people in the room. or you're going to sever some ties. Like how does that? I think like we're experiencing that right now.
Yeah, we are, and even before Brant, like. If you're a discipleship group leader, you heard us at our leadership summit back in September talking about some of the challenges. And Pastor Derek and I gave a list of 10 ways to measure yourself on is the ministry you're leading, fulfilling the mission of Jesus. And one of the things we talked about was we have had discipleship groups where the focus is we don't really want any new people joining our group. We don't want to reach people. We don't want to have new people. We just like us being together, which is great. I'm glad that you have found some people that you want to call friends. Like it's so incredibly important in being a Christian. But it's not the main point. It's not the primary calling. And so if we live in a space where we go, I don't really want to add new people, we're creating a culture immediately that just says, well, we don't really have room for the Great Commission. And I don't think we should have any of that kind of mentality if we are going to be disciples who are making disciples, right? And so it's a very subtle little thing that many churches, including Forward at one point in our life. And I'm not, please don't hear me as trying to put down churches or say churches are on mission drift. I just think it's a sign you have to watch out for to say, is the focus on community actually becoming a higher priority than the actual mission that Jesus has called us to?
Yeah. And part of that, I think that's so helpful. That idea of community, like again, like it's placing these good things and placing them in too high of a priority.
Yeah.
And certainly like community. I mean, this has been a big focus at Kitchener.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
As we've gone through some transitions over the years of realizing like it is important for us to have deep community, but we can't stop there. I always go back to a friend of mine was on a podcast, and this is where he's a church leader, and he said if he's talking about church leadership, he's like, if you're not friends, then what's the point? And that phrase is always sticks with me. I'm like, I genuinely want to be friends with my elders and with,
right.
Other staff members and the people I'm serving with,
right.
like anyone in the church. Like if we're serving together, I could genuinely want to be like friends with you,
right?
Because it's just not fun.
Exactly. And this is what I love.
But it's not. But that's not the point,
right?
Though.
And this is what I love about this. Is what I love about Jesus. And so, if someone wants to challenge me on this, feel free. I would love to have this conversation with you. But like, here's what I see with Jesus. When Jesus first called his disciples, he did not say, "Follow me, and we'll be great friends." Like his leading line was not follow me and let's come into community together. His leading line was follow me and I'm going to make you fishers of men. Like right day one, Jesus was focused on his mission. I'm going to disciple you so that you're going to go out and disciple other people. But what we know about Jesus and the relationship he had with those 12 is that Jesus would later say, like, we are friends. Like he would describe their relationship as a friendship relationship. And it's modeled multiple times over the kind of friendship that they created and had with each other. So it's not that friendship and community isn't important. It's incredibly important to what you just said. Like you want to build friendship with those people. It's just not the primary point of church. Yeah.
So there's that side of I think community. That's a great one. The one that I was thinking of is how, and again, this isn't necessarily that mission drift is happening, but it can be an indicator of it. Is when a church and when people are focusing too much on tradition.
Yep.
And what I mean by tradition isn't necessarily like hundreds and hundreds of years of church tradition. It might be tradition as in for the past 5 years, this is how we've done Christmas. And then this year we did something a little bit different, and it kind of rubs up against you a little bit the wrong way. It's the church that you grew up in, and realizing that things are now operating a little bit differently. And that's challenging, right?
Yep.
Because, who doesn't, the reason why we like traditions, especially around like, I'm just in Christmas mode right now because I had a design team meeting the other day, but I was thinking about like the reason why we don't we tend not to like new Christmas songs. We like the old classics.
Yeah, I don't even
40,
like. I don't even
50 years
like.
ago.
I don't even like those.
Oh boy, get out of here.
I'm a Scrooge. I do not like Christmas carols.
There's something warm and familiar about it, and we enjoy these things, and yet that can be a good thing. It feels warm and comfortable, but it can distract us from what we're called to. And I want to unpack a little bit more. Just take a moment now of something I said on Sunday, because I addressed this really head on, and I said if anyone wants to talk more, email me. No one did, so I guess we're all good. But I just addressed an issue at Kitchener, and it's an issue that really that new churches are going to continue to face, which is the idea of space.
Right.
And the issue is that at Kitchener right now, like we don't own our space. We're in a rental property right now. And we've expressed this time and time again in different meetings, trying to be really clear with everyone. Like it would be a blessing, and we have searched for it. It would be amazing. This is what I didn't emphasize enough on Sunday. I think of it would be amazing if we had a permanent home.
Yep.
That would be a huge blessing, where we wouldn't have to set up as much as we do right now.
Yep.
I'm on the setup team. I got to tell you, I love to stop stacking chairs.
Sure.
That would be a blessing, but it can't be our main focus. That it would be that we would get, as forward, our focus isn't on real estate of buying properties. Our focus needs to be on the mission, though having space is an important aspect of it.
Yep.
And I think like that's the thing where it's easy, like these are good things, helpful things to have good spaces. But when I think of Beyond Forward and just churches across Canada right now, thinking of like, this is the thing I'm trying to like wrap my head around. Any new church that gets started today is going to have an incredibly hard time finding a permanent location. Most are going to find themselves renting schools, community centers. And in so many ways, this looks like the future of the church is to be in spaces like this. And for us as believers, we need to get increasingly more comfortable with this idea of being in rental spaces and not in a space that we necessarily have the deed to that building.
You're 100% right.
And I'm trying to understand, like, how do we move forward as a church? So forward is if we have a multiplying mindset. Help us understand that a little bit more of how do we move forward now in this day and age where it seems like more and more churches are going to be looking like how, and this is why I'm really passionate about it, but for Kitchener, I want to figure it out. So in some ways we can be a model for other churches to be like, hey, we made some missteps here and there, but here's like how you can do it well in that type of location.
Yeah, that's a great question. I agree with you. It will be an increasing challenge for churches in the days ahead to have their own facilities. And not only because of the cost of building buildings, it's also the way that cities are zoning now. They are not zoning for places of worship. They want to zone as much as possible for residential because they get the tax money.
So even if you have 10 or 15 million,
right,
it might be hard.
It might be hard because you got to find the land in a city that's willing to zone the land for a place of worship. Right. And so you are, it will be increasingly challenging, but let's look at 2,000 years of history of the church and even what we read in the New Testament of the church. And let's understand that the church and the mission of Jesus is not and has never been defined or confined by what kind of space do we have to worship in. Mm-hmm. We've met in houses as the body of Christ. We still do in some parts of the world.
Yeah.
We've met in community centers and in schools, and we've met in basements of apartment buildings. And like It's the beauty of the way Jesus has created the church is it is not confined to a building or a specific type of building.
Yeah.
The mission can be carried out anywhere at any time in any place that God puts his people. And that is what we have to look at. Then we have to look at and say, what are the resources that God has given to us to help facilitate the mission? And it's going to be different everywhere.
Yeah.
The resources we have in Canada, even forget about between our different sites, just in Canada, the resources we have compared to the church in Lebanon or Ukraine right now
Right.
are incredibly different types of resources.
Yeah.
But the church can be still just as much on mission in Ukraine and Lebanon as it can be in Canada.
And that's where like there's context there. Like I said on Sunday, I think in a Canadian context, the space that we have, I think is incredibly important.
Yep.
Part of which is because I heard Francis Chan say this years ago, that if he was starting a brand new church, what he would do is he would just find like an open field, just meet there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, great, Francis Chan. That works in
California.
California.
Yeah.
That works in Hawaii.
Yeah.
You know that doesn't work? February in Ontario.
That's right.
It doesn't work here.
No, you're right. And buildings are incredibly important. They're an incredibly important resource to have.
Yeah.
For what God's called us to.
And I just want to keep on emphasizing on that of like, let's make sure that whatever space we have, whether it's a restaurant, a community center, or here at Cambridge, we're blessed to have this facility, but all of these are spaces that we can use for this mission.
Yep.
And I think like that's just so incredibly important that we continue to see that and steward all these spaces really, really well, because they are blessings, and we don't want to have a field in the middle of February.
Can I talk about one more thing on a personal level for people? Because we're talking at a church level where churches can drift. I want to talk about a personal level where I think Christians can drift off mission. And again, this is a good thing that I'm going to say. It's just we sometimes make it ultimate thing. Okay? And it's this, self-care. So I'm all in and believe in the importance of caring for your soul, of caring for your body. Like, I think those are all expressions of being a follower of Jesus, is taking time to be alone with God, allow God to minister to your heart and your mind, taking time to eat properly, exercise. I think that's part of honoring God with your body. So it's incredibly important. But we live in an environment that is incredibly focused on the self. That the self is the highest level that you should strive for, and self-care is an expression of that. And so people end up thinking through, making all kinds of decisions in life about how to spend their time and their money and their energy through the lens of what is the best thing for me. Right? And I think that is just, I understand it. I understand why we go there.
Yeah.
But it's not going to actually help you fulfill the mission of Jesus.
So unpack that some more.
Yeah.
Like why?
Because if that is your ultimate goal, is self.
Yeah.
Right? Self will not lead you to sacrifice so that other people can experience the gospel. Self will not lead you to give generously, like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, right? Like, if the highest goal of life is what's going to be the best thing for me, it will not lead you down that path. Instead, what you discover is, if I go down the way of Jesus, if I follow the way of Jesus, he will want me to care for myself as part of living out the mission. But it's not the higher goal. The goal is still the mission, right? I take care of myself so that I am spiritually, physically, emotionally in a better place to be able to live out the mission that Jesus has called me to.
Yeah, because I think you can go too far in either direction there, right? Like you can go too far where you don't take care of your
Exactly.
of your soul or for your body or for your finances, where you are running so hard into the mission that you do it in a ruinous way.
Yep.
And like there's that side, and then there's the other side of everything is focused on the self, and I'll group the family in there as well.
Yep,
Everything's grouped around the family, the self, and then when it comes to, you hear a message about generosity, you say, I have nothing extra I can give. But generosity is not about the extra that you have. That's not the spirit of generosity that we see in scripture, especially if you're taking care of like all these like, extra things that tend to come into our lives.
Yep.
All these other expenses and all these other priorities that we end up having. So like these are like why are those two problems? Like maybe start off on the side where some people just run like way too hard and they end up burning themselves out. Like, isn't that to the glory of God? And we should all do that.
No, it's to the glory of yourself. Honestly, it is to the glory of yourself. Because if you're, I'll give you an example. If you're not paying any attention to the state of your soul, and taking care of yourself there, and then what you're really saying is, I don't need Jesus to do Jesus's mission. I can just do this. But in reality, Jesus says you can do nothing apart from him. So taking care of your soul is essential to actually being able to live out the mission that Jesus has called you to. You can't separate the two. So I think some of it is there are people who are wired in such a way that feel like they need to prove something to God. So they're going to go all in and they're going to do this. I'm not going to take care of myself. When Jesus talks about denying yourself, he's not talking about denying taking care of the essential things for you to be a healthy person. What he's saying is, the priorities in life that are going to lift you above Jesus and his mission, those are the things that you're denying. You're denying the flesh in you that wants to elevate yourself to being God as opposed to God being God of your life.
I think an aspect of this that I know I've encountered many people who've struggled with this is actually truly understanding how much God loves and cares for you. And for those that I've seen that have run themselves so ragged, I think that they're the ones I would say have the deepest struggle to truly understand that God views them as a son and a daughter. They're the ones that God he actually sacrificed himself for you. That's how much he loves and cares for you. So we need to actually receive that love. And I think when we do that, that will help us in understanding how we should be setting our priorities and how we're living our lives.
So just to give you a personal example on that. So last week, there were a few challenges that I was wrestling with last week, and I was feeling pretty tired with everything. And here's an example of just trying to do my part to take care of my own soul. So I'm right now in my devotions, I'm reading through the book of Isaiah. And I get to this passage in Isaiah 43. And so I want to share this passage for anyone who is in a spot today that describes what Daryl's talking about, that you are running so hard, thinking that you're serving God, and I just got to keep doing more and keep doing more and keep doing more. And to understand how great God's love is for you, that you don't need to do more because God's already done everything that needs to be done. He's inviting you into his mission, but he's not asking you to carry the load. And, I get to Isaiah 43, and this is what God said to me in my devotions. This is what the Lord says, the one who created you and the one who formed you. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name. You are mine. I'll be with you when you pass through the waters and when you pass through the rivers. They won't overwhelm you. You will not be scorched when you walk through the fire, and the flame will not burn you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, and your Savior. You are precious in my sight and honored, and I love you. And I had to read that passage every day last week. God wouldn't let me get past that chapter in my devotions.
What's that chapter again?
Isaiah 43.
Isaiah 43. That's amazing. And that actually ties in. We've spent a lot of time today not working off of my questions. So I was going to ask questions about going, about baptism, about head knowledge.
Yep.
We're going to skip all those. So let's jump down to the bottom, because there's so much in this. Like Jesus is so practical to his disciples. He's telling them exactly, like, you're going to go, you're going to make disciples, you're going to baptize them, teaching them to obey. And like, there's all this stuff that we can unpack there. And the good news is, for the next 3 weeks now, we are going to unpack a lot of that stuff of how this all actually plays out in our lives, and it's going to be really, really helpful. But he concludes by saying, remember this though, I'm with you always to the end of the age. What a beautiful way that, Jesus ends this, and Matthew, the author of the gospel, just ends it right there. I love that he doesn't add a conclusion to his writing. He's just like, I'm done. I think that's the gospel right there.
Can't top that.
Put a period there and just gonna send it off to the churches. What a beautiful thing. And we both in our messages talked about the presence of Jesus. And I talked about practicing the presence of Jesus. This idea, and I quoted or referred to was it Brother Lawrence, who was a monk from the 17th century, talking about how you can know and experience the presence of Jesus as you're working in the garden or in the kitchen and all the mundane things of life.
The book is called The Practice of the Presence of God. Read it.
And so, like, here's the question as we bring things to a close, because my concern is, for the podcast listeners, because I know if you're listening to a podcast and you're this point in, 50 minutes in, you're a type A person. You might not agree to it, but if you got this far into it and you're like, I can't turn it off because I got to finish it because, I'm a firstborn and I finish things. I called you guys out. So if that's you, I want you to not take from this series, like, here's the things I'm going to do and I'm going to get it done. And I'm going to send me to the, send me with Andrew. We're going to plant that church. We're going to make this happen. All that's wonderful. But we want to make sure that we're taking care of our souls. I want us to drill down one more time onto this idea of practicing the presence of Jesus. What are some practical things, that Kirk, that you want to leave our listeners with, of how do we do this, understanding we're making disciples, we are disciples, we need Jesus. How do we feel and experience his presence in our lives today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, first of all, in order to know what to look for, you need to spend time communing with God. So you need to spend time both in prayer and in time reading the Bible, because the Bible is part of how God helps us to see him, to know what he's like and how he operates. It helps us to know and discern, like, where do I pay attention to what God is doing? Because if you can see it in the Bible, you can start to pay attention to the things that are around you. So that's the first thing I would say. Like, if Bible reading and prayer and communing with God, not just as a checklist, but actually taking the time to say, no, when I read my Bible, it is God speaking to me. So I want to hear what God wants to say. And when I pray, I am actually talking to God. It's not just a checklist of things I'm bringing because I got to pray about these things, but I'm actually talking to the King of the universe. Posture yourself in that way. It changes the way that you pray, and it changes the way that you read the Bible. The other thing that I would say is, the Bible tells us that God's mercies are new every day, and great is his faithfulness. One of the prayers that I've started praying is, God, help me to pay attention to your mercies that are new today. Just help me to see things for today that I need to see, where it just tells me that you're with me, where you're just showing up in some way I didn't expect or didn't see before in my life. and then pay attention. Watch how God shows up. Today for me, it was on my drive into work, and there's just this beautiful view as I come around a corner, and there was low-hanging fog over that was underneath some trees that were changing colors, and the colors were just bright red on the trees. And I was like, man, the handiwork of God to just create that. It was a masterpiece of art that I was seeing. And it just made me go, wow, like God is here and he's real. So think about those things where you're just asking God, like, hey, God, help me to see your mercies today.
Yeah.
Those are a couple things, practices that I've been building into my own life and certainly have not become an expert on, but it has helped me tremendously in my own heart.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to end us here in this idea, because you end your message on this idea, asking the question, will you say yes to Jesus? And for each person, that yes is going to look different in this season right now. But as we pursue this, practicing the presence of Jesus, I think that's incredibly important, that if we're going to say yes to Jesus, we need to hear the voice of Jesus. And so this is where I want to end this challenge of, are you listening to his voice? And I get it, that life is busy. I'm feeling it right now.
Yep.
But we need to make sure that we're making space in our lives. And there's two ways that we can hear his voice. One is by making that physical space. And so the beautiful thing about being on Ontario in the fall is, as you just described, you can go for a drive or go for a walk and see the amazing colors that are out there, and there's a crispness in the air. And I just want to commend to our listeners of take advantage of this space as best you can. And for some of you, you have the freedom in your job where you can take a half day, and you could either do that to do hundreds of different things. But maybe the best thing you could do for your soul right now is take a half day and just literally spend some time with Jesus. Just put it on the calendar and just say, hey, like this coming Monday or next Saturday, I'm just going to spend an hour or 2 or 3 in the presence of Jesus. Go for a walk, go for a drive, and listen to his voice of what is he calling you to as a disciple. Ask that question, and then listen and allow the Spirit to speak to you. For some of you, that's going to look different ways. You might not be able to get away. You might have obligations, but try to find that space. And then the other thing of practicing this presence is also often there are habits, there are decisions that we have made that make it difficult to hear the voice of Jesus. And so for anyone who's hearing this and they're like, I want to hear the presence, I want the power of Jesus, but there's something in the way and I don't feel it. You guys are all touchy-feely. I need like the cold hard facts. And here's the thing. For those who, and I get it, there are many who struggle with this, and this is what I always say to those who I think are really struggling in hearing and feeling the presence of Jesus, is one of the places that we can start is in the place of confession. If that's where you're at right now, confess it to Jesus of saying, I don't feel this right now, but I want to. And in that time of confession, the Holy Spirit might lead you to, hey, there's some practices in your life that maybe this is what's getting in the way. Maybe it's some ongoing sin in your life. Or it could even be good things that have taken the place of what really should be priorities. And we should even confess those things. Maybe I've elevated something else. Maybe you've even elevated the area of serving somewhere in the church so highly that it's actually in the place of where Jesus needs to be in your life, where you're really just trying to fulfill this gap that only Jesus can really fill. And so maybe starting in the place of confession is the place where you need to start today. And maybe you need to unpack some more. And that's where if you need to reach out to a pastor, to a counselor, we want to be there for you, where you don't have to do this entirely on your own. As a church family, we want to come around and support you as you go through this. So this is where I want to end today. I know it's been about an hour now into the podcast, and hopefully you guys can continue tracking with us as we continue in the next 3 weeks in the mission forward of what this looks like as we learn how to be disciples, how to make disciples who love God, love others, and serve the world. Thanks for joining us today.